Hello, I'm Kaitlin Erdman, and today I will be talking to you a little bit about environmental structure of the classroom and setting up for success. So a little bit of background information about me. I am currently a special education teacher in Northern Virginia. I teach students K through 5 with multiple disabilities. More specifically, most of my students are on the autism spectrum. This is my 8th year teaching in a classroom like that. And my background is in applied behavior analysis, where I got my master's degree from Shenandoah University. And I am excited to present to you guys today on my experience and kind of how I set up a classroom and how I help other educators set up their classrooms. So when I think about setting up a classroom for success, these are some key things that I think are the most important to do that. Structural setup, consistency routines and predictability, visual supports, and promoting independence. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about each of those things and what those mean. So for structural setup, when I think about structural setup, I think about identifying areas within our classroom and the ones that are most important to our students on the spectrum and how we can make it most beneficial so that they get the most out of their learning environment. When I go into a new year in my classroom, I always start with a blank slate. Some of my students I get year after year, and some of my students come in new to me. So, we just kind of adapt and figure out what works best for them and how you may set up your classroom at the start of the year might look different by the middle to end of the year. So what I like to do is I like to start off with like a blank sheet of paper, and I'll kind of draw out the layout of my classroom, and I'll identify the areas that are most important to me, like workstations, independent stations, group work, a calming sensory area, and how can I best segment that so that my students are able to identify what should take place in those parts of the classroom. Another thing that I really think about is safety. So in our classroom with our staff, our paraprofessionals, one thing that I really like to think about is that we can see all areas of the classroom. So if I have a student who may be having a difficult time and needs to utilize the calming down area of our classroom, I want to ensure that if myself or a para is working in another area of the classroom, that we are all still able to visually see that student to ensure safety for that student. Thinking about consistencies, routines, and predictability, these are very important to me for any child, but especially our students on the spectrum. We really want to think about how we can best make their school day the most predictable that it can, even though we know things go awry. Keeping things consistent within the classroom so that when they come in, they know what is to be expected, and keeping those routines in place. So one thing that is important is to model those expectations, both you and your paraprofessionals, ensuring that everyone is on the same page. One thing that I like to do before the school year starts is I like to sit down and meet with my paraprofessionals, and we go over, what are my expectations as the classroom teacher? What expectations do I have of them? And what are they unsure about? A lot of questions that I'll get from them is like prompting, we want to go least to most. So we go over, what does that look like? And for each individual student that we have, what should that look like? Modeling that for our paraprofessionals is important, as well as modeling it for the students when they come in. Modeling simple things in the classroom, like when we line up, where do we go to? I use visual boundaries for that. I use markers so that my students know where they're supposed to go when we line up. Modeling, what does morning work look like? Going up to the board and having students know that they're supposed to stay seated and kind of work through that with us. What does it look like if they need to use the restroom? Do they just get up and go, or do they request it, whether they're verbal or nonverbal? How do they do that? So just ensuring that all of those expectations within the classroom are modeled from the very beginning and consistency is in place with you and your staff. Another thing is to provide those visual supports, like I was just kind of talking about, ensuring that, there are visual supports that are easily tangible to the students should they need them to request something. Ensuring that parts of your classroom is labeled visually so that they know what the areas are that they're supposed to be in and what is supposed to occur in those areas of the classroom. This also helps prompt your paraprofessionals as well as the students of what is supposed to occur at those times. For example, very, very simple, I have like task analysis labeled at my sink in my classroom, so that when a student goes over to promote independence, we will have them go through and say, these are the steps. And we're able to kind of wean them off of that. And that's a lot of consistency. Preparing students for changes that happen in the classroom. I know us as adults, we have difficulty with that. and ourselves. So think about little ones when they're coming in, especially if they've never been in school, how difficult that can be for them when they come in with a set expectation and then one day they're told it's going to be completely different. I like to use visual schedules for this. So a lot of the times in our school day, there can be times where their specials is changed, like if they have PE or music, that may have changed. So they might have come in on a Wednesday thinking that they were going to go to PE and it's now changed to music. So having that visual schedule posted to let them know, today you're not going to have PE, you are going to have music, and ensuring that they're giving warnings and you're talking about those upcoming changes to make those transitions easier for those students. We use visual timers a lot. I use them both in group work and in independent stations. I found that this works for most of my students, most all of them. They really like the visual timers. I think it just gives them that kind of visual piece to let them know that this is what they're supposed to be doing at this time. And when it's up, it almost is like a sign of relief to them that they have completed the task at hand. Minimizing distractions in the classroom. So this one is a hard one because I'm not talking about just distractions among like the classroom environment as far as like, the sound level of the smart board or the music that you may be using. I'm talking about like even noise level amongst staff. I really talk to my staff about the most appropriate times for us to have conversations with our students or about our students. We really talk a lot about if they're working during independent or group work, that is not times that we as professionals should be having a conversation. We really need to be focusing on the students and their needs. So that way it's not so much of a distraction. If you're working one-on-one with a child, you want to make sure that they are able to focus on that and there's not an adult conversation going on somewhere else in the room. Same thing with volume. If we're using like sensory-based videos, I'll use a lot of like music or scenery that's kind of calming effect when they're on sensory break. And just ensuring that noise level is at a medium, because you don't want to give oversensitivity or undersensitivity to students that may have a difficult time with that. Lighting in the classroom. This is a tough one. I've had a lot of other educators talk about if they're in newer buildings, like LED lighting and how that really affects some students. So using light fixture covers if your building is allowed to use those. We've also had like maintenance come in and try to adjust. It's all about adaptability, and sometimes you can't minimize all distractions, but doing the best at what you're given just to benefit your students. That is our main goal. So something that is really important to me is that classrooms that provide consistent expectations and predictable routines will almost always promote independence for your students, because then they know what is expected of them and what is going on in the day. And what I have found is that really increases on-task behavior. I get a lot more out of my students when they know what is expected of them and they understand that it's give and take. You do for me and I'll give you what you want. And that really, really helps keep our environment in the classroom flowing. So I know I've hit on visual supports quite a lot. This is huge in a classroom, especially with students on the autism spectrum. We use many different kinds of visual supports. We have a visual schedule for whole group so that our students know how we are running our classroom. I even incorporate whole group sensory breaks. However, I do also have independent sensory breaks with my students' individual schedules. I use simple things like the red all dones you can see here to kind of help my students see that their day is coming to a close. I think that really helps them feel relieved, much like us as adults, when we know that something's coming to an end, and it kind of gives us that sigh of relief. I feel like that this also does that for our students. And they really, really like it. I usually pick a student as a classroom job to come up and be my person who puts in the all dones. So continuing to promote that independence. And then I also like to provide a lot of choice within my classroom. One thing that I have found that is really great for our students is to allow times where they have a choice in what is happening and they have say in what is happening. So when I am working with a student on independent work, I will present them with two things. Do you want to work on this goal today, or do you want to work on this goal? And then they will select like what they want to earn while they're working on that goal. We will do things like having a whole group choice board. So once we're done with whole group lessons, I will present this on the board and I will call each student up independently to select what they would like to do for their break. This also promotes some social skills at the same time in the classroom, because if a student is already at the space that the other student might want as their break, they either have to pick a different one or they have to go over and request to switch with that student, which is really, really awesome because it allows for them to kind of interact with their peers and again, promoting independence and social skills in the day. Another part of visual supports that I use is workstations. Some people call these centers, work systems, anything that promotes like independent work for our students. I really try to back away from my students as much as possible and promote maximum independence. So I want my students to be able to, sit and attend to a task and complete the task and feel like they achieved it on their own. That is huge, and seeing their success in that is amazing. So one thing that I do is we have workstation cards. They are a small square card that usually has their name on it. And then I assign each student their own symbol. I have 3 stations in my classroom. Station 1 is our group station. Station 2 is our independent workstation. And station 3 is our like kind of social skills, social play station. So when the students have their cards during station work, they will be assigned to go to one of those stations. And when they come to that station, they have to complete the task at hand. So if they go to the individual workstation for the work system boxes, they'll complete whatever is given to them at the task. When they are finished with that task, they will take the symbol off of their workstation card and they will hang it up at their station center to indicate that they have completed that station. My students thrive off of this because 1, it gives them something tangible that they are in control of doing. And 2, it allows for them to know what's expected. So I've completed station 1, now I go to station 2, and they really seem to like doing this. So I have found that this is huge in my classroom. I would venture to say that anybody, if you don't have this implemented, this would be a really good thing to implement within your classroom for your students. Another important form of visual supports that I use are visual boundaries. When we were talking about structural setup of the classroom and kind of segmenting things so students know what occurs in what areas of the classroom, visual boundaries plays a huge role in that. So one thing I have done is I have used like colored tape to kind of section off like a student's area. If you have a student who has difficulty staying in their space, just providing them with a visual boundary around their desk, as you can see in the picture above, will kind of help keep them in the area that you want them to understand is their space. I've also done things like in the bottom right picture, with the pandemic, when we were talking about, trying to implement things to keep our students as safe as possible at that time. I used visual boundaries I painted their desks like cars. So they all had a designated color. So they knew that that was their color, that was their space. And it just helped segment the room as well. This year I have separated our sensory area. So on the sensory area swing side, I have separated it with black tape. And then there is like a large lime green mat, as you had seen in the previous pictures, that kind of indicates this is our calm down space. And then the other side of the room very much shows that it's the workspace. I also have these areas labeled, independent work, group work, whole group time, and calm down area. When you use visual boundaries, it really helps students know what is supposed to occur in those parts of the room. Some students will try to elope to like the more liked area of the room, such as the calm down corner. So again, modeling expectations, reinforcing desired behaviors. That is what's going to continue to reinforce that consistency and routine and predictability of your classroom. So I would say using visual boundaries is very important within the classroom environment. One thing that I've talked a lot about is promoting independence. So for me, independence is very, very important in my classroom. So I set my classroom up so that my students have a lot of things that they can do independently and feel success with that. One thing that I do with my students is I implement classroom jobs. So simple jobs like line leader, end of the line, passing out supplies, passing out papers. In the beginning, we model what each of these would look like. A lot of the times I'll use like a peer model, students that I have had before and know what those jobs entail. I'll kind of select them first for those jobs so that they can kind of model with me for the younger students or the newer students of what those jobs should look like. Again, this promotes independence and it allows a lot of fluidity within the classroom. Another thing that I do is I have baskets with my students' names at the front, and that is where they turn in their daily work that we've completed throughout the day that they will be taking home. With these baskets, students are responsible in the morning when they come in to put their backpacks where they go, put their folder in their basket, and check those things off on their visual schedule. Once that this is done and the day is coming to a close, my students are getting in the routine of being able to independently go and get that basket, put their papers in their folder, and put that within their backpack. When a student is doing that and not requiring a lot of those phase prompts, it's really, really amazing to see their growth in that and to see how they feel success in that they have gone and gotten that on their own and they've independently packed away their things. To do this, again, you have to use a lot of those visual supports. You have to have almost like a task analysis of when they come in, what are they supposed to do? What is their expectation of that day? My students, when they come in, they each have a visual of what they need to do to start their morning, taking off their backpack, taking off their jacket, putting away their folder. And most of them are at the point, in this school year, 4 weeks in, of where those things would go. So I would say, as you're setting up your classroom, keep those things in mind. Keep in mind, what can you have your students do that will promote independence, and using visual supports to help aid in that so that they are able to follow those routines with the least amount of prompting. So again, when we're talking about setting up success and we're talking about the things that are most important, these are, again, the ones that I find very, very important for a classroom setup. Structural setup is a big one, using your furniture to the best that you can to segment parts of your classroom, visual boundaries to separate parts of your classroom, ensuring that you have safety within the classroom. All areas of your classroom are able to be seen by you and your support staff. Consistency, routines, and predictability, ensuring that you guys are staying consistent in what you're doing across the board, across staff, ensuring that your students understand the routines when they come in and what is to be expected of them, and ensuring that they are able to predict what should be done for that day. We talked a lot about if we're changing something for that day, that we talk through it and we make them aware that a change is coming. We don't just slam it on them and say, oh, I'm sorry, like today, that's not what's happening. Giving them that predictability so that they know what is happening in the classroom. Utilizing those visual supports, definitely important for the environment of the classroom. I would say having a visual schedule for the classroom, having individual visual schedules, ensuring that all students who require visual supports, visuals are communication for everybody, nonverbal and verbal. So the more that you use them, the better your environment of your classroom will be. And then promoting that independence, utilizing things that the students can do on their own, simple as packing up their own baskets, making their own selections for their sensory choices, just ensuring that we are promoting the maximum of independence in the classroom as we can, and maintaining consistency, routine, and predictability. So that is typically how I would say to start with setting up the environmental structure of your classroom. These are the things that I have found to be the most successful in my 8 years of working with students on the spectrum. And I really, really think that those are the most important things. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. My name is Kaitlin Erdman again, and thank you.